In the soft hush between memory and dream, dear listener, there lives a story woven from warmth, friendship, and a kind of laughter that never quite fades. Tonight, as you rest and your breathing settles into an easy rhythm, we'll drift gently backward to the quiet beginnings of 4 children who would one day make magic that outlasted their years. Long before anyone whispered about a Marauder's map, before parchment carried secret footsteps and playful words, there were simply 4 young souls, James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter, each growing up beneath a different roof, each surrounded by a different kind of love, all slowly being drawn toward one another. Let's begin where light first touched the story, with James Potter. James was born on a clear March morning in 1960. Outside, the English countryside was still cool with the tail of winter, but inside the Potter home there was warmth everywhere. Firelight in the hearth, steam rising from a kettle, laughter filling each room as if it had been waiting for years to return. His parents, Flamont and Euphemia, had long wished for a child. They had grown older together through quiet seasons of hoping, their love becoming gentler and deeper with every year that passed without a cry in the nursery. When at last that cry arrived, when James opened his eyes to the world, the house itself seemed to exhale in relief. The Potter's home was welcoming rather than grand. Shelves of well-read books, a kitchen that always smelled faintly of honey and toast, windows that let in soft light no matter the weather. Magic lingered there the way scent lingers on a favorite scarf, comfortable and familiar. From the beginning, James was surrounded by laughter and patience. His parents taught him that kindness was worth far more than cleverness, that bravery began with compassion, and that a day without laughter was a day only half lived. His first accidental spell came early. One evening when bedtime was announced and James was not yet ready to give up his play, his mother's hair suddenly turned a shocking scarlet. Euphemia gasped, then caught sight of herself in the mirror, and laughed until tears gathered in her eyes. Fleamont lifted his tiny son and said with a smile, "A born transfiguration prodigy, this one." In that house, even mischief was a reason to smile. The Potters never demanded perfection. They encouraged curiosity, gentle experiments with toy brooms, questions about every spark that leapt from a wand. And so, James grew in a world where magic meant comfort, never fear, where mistakes were only lessons wrapped in giggles. Sirius, across London, another child opened his eyes to a different kind of home. The Black family townhouse at number 12, Grimmauld Place, was tall, proud, and silent. Its windows stayed shattered, its portraits watched instead of smiled, and its air carried the heavy scent of old magic. Sirius Orion Black was born there on a cold November evening in 1959, into a family that valued bloodlines more than laughter. His mother, Walburga, held him carefully, as if affection might stain something valuable. His father, Orion, inspected him the way one inspects an heirloom, checking that it looked exactly as tradition required. But baby Sirius had other ideas. From his first weeks, he carried a restless spark, a brightness that didn't fit easily inside those dark halls. Even before he could speak, there was a lively curiosity in his grey eyes that promised questions the household would never welcome. When he was 2, a fit of toddler frustration lit the nursery curtains into shimmering blue flame. The fire died quickly, but the moment stayed in family memory as a warning. "Control," Walburga told him sternly, "is everything." Yet control was the one thing Sirius would never wish to master completely. Grimmauld Place taught rules, never warmth. Its magic felt strict and watchful. Its portraits whispered of pride and purity, of who should be honored and who should be scorned. Sirius listened, small and serious, and felt only the quiet wish to be somewhere brighter. He would find that brightness one day in a castle far to the north, where the fires burned friendly and the laughter was real. But for now, He grew in a house that misunderstood him, carrying inside a small, stubborn promise. That life could be larger than walls lined with judgment. Remus, far from the city, in the gentle hills of Wales, another child arrived beneath kinder skies. Remus John Lupin was born on a mild spring evening in 1960. His mother, Hope, a muggle with a patient smile, wrapped him in a soft blanket that smelled of lavender. His father, Lyle, a wizard and scholar of magical creatures, looked down at his son with quiet pride. Their home was modest, filled with warmth rather than wealth. Bookshelves crowded with well-loved volumes. A garden where wildflowers mixed with herbs. A kettle that always seemed just on the verge of boiling for tea. Remus grew up surrounded by small, steady love, the sort that never raised its voice. He was a calm child, content to sit and watch sunlight through a window, fascinated by dust motes turning in the air. Hope sang to him in Welsh while Lyle read bedtime stories about brave witches, gentle giants, and talking owls. From them he learned that courage came in many shapes, and that kindness was a kind of everyday spell. When Remus was 3, his first magic appeared. A torn page in his favorite book mended itself beneath his small hands. His parents shared a look of wonder and quiet pride. "He'll be gentle with his magic," Hope said. And he was. The Lupin's life was peaceful for a time, yet tragedy, as it sometimes does, came suddenly. A werewolf's bite changed everything. The story of that night is often told in harsh words, of attack, of pain, but we will not dwell there. What matters for our quiet tale is what followed. Love that did not falter. Lyle's guilt was deep, but his care for his son became deeper still. Hope's tenderness became fierce devotion. They moved often, protecting Remus from curious eyes, creating safe spaces wherever they went. And though the boy learned early that he was different, he also learned that he was cherished. From that knowledge grew the patience, empathy, and wisdom that would one day make others feel safe in his presence. Peter, in a small wizarding village not far from the coast, Peter Pettigrew was born a few months after Remus. His parents kept a modest shop selling potion ingredients and household charms. They were kind, if a little distracted, too busy balancing ledgers to notice the small, watchful child quietly stacking cauldrons behind the counter. Peter's magic came late, and when it did, it was subtle, a toy quill that floated an inch above his hand before dropping again. His parents cheered as though he had turned lead into gold. Their delight made him beam, though a faint worry already lived behind his smile. He wanted to be extraordinary and feared he was not. Growing up among louder, bolder children, Peter learned to survive by listening. He was polite, eager, helpful, the sort of boy who fetched things when asked, who laughed at the right moments. He dreamed of being brave someday. But for now, being included was enough. He could not have known that his wish to belong, innocent as it was, would shape every path ahead of him. For now, he was simply a small boy watching the world, ready to follow wherever friendship might lead. The journey north. And so, dear listener, 4 boys, born within months of one another, scattered across Britain like stars in different skies, grew quietly toward the same horizon. Each carried something unique. James's cheerful courage, Sirius's hungry curiosity, Remus's gentle wisdom, Peter's quiet longing. None of them yet knew the others' names, but the world was already preparing to bring them together. September the 1st, 1971. Arrived with a clear sky over London. Platform 9 3/4 shimmered into view between the ordinary platforms, its scarlet engine breathing clouds of white steam. The air was full of excitement, of trunks being lifted, owls hooting softly, voices overlapping in bright chaos. James Potter, nearly 12, stood with his parents beside the train. His new robes were a little too crisp, his hair as untidy as ever despite his mother's attempts to flatten it. His father's hand rested on his shoulder. Hogwarts will teach you plenty of spells, Fleamont told him kindly. But it's up to you to learn what truly matters. Be kind, Euphemia added, pressing a kiss to his cheek. Magic is strongest when it comes from goodness. James hugged them both, and then, full of energy and hope, bounded toward the train. He found an empty compartment halfway down the corridor, tossed his bag inside, and claimed it as his own, stretching out with the easy comfort of someone who felt welcome everywhere. On the same platform, Sirius Black stood a little apart from his parents. His mother's farewell was a list of expectations rather than affection. You will remember your name. You will honor your house. You will bring no shame upon the family. Sirius nodded, saying nothing. When they turned away, he felt an unexpected lightness. Lonely, yes, but also a hint of freedom. He boarded the train, walking its corridor with his head high, trying not to look as uncertain as he felt. Halfway along, he passed a compartment where a boy with impossibly messy hair sat grinning out the window. Looking for a seat? The boy asked cheerfully. Plenty of room in here. I'm James Sirius, he replied. That was all. Just a name, offered and accepted. But something in the air shifted, a thread drawn tight between them. They began to talk, and soon their laughter filled the space like sunlight. A little later, Remus Lupin stepped onto the train with his worn suitcase, a neatly folded letter from Professor Dumbledore tucked safely away. His parents had hugged him fiercely on the platform, both whispering the same thing. You deserve this. He found a quiet compartment near the back and opened a book, hoping to fade gently into the journey. But fate, or perhaps kindness, had other plans. James, Sirius, and a nervous-looking boy trailing behind them paused at his door. Mind if we sit here? James asked with his usual grin. We've run out of snacks and conversation. Remus hesitated, then nodded. The nervous boy introduced himself as Peter Pettigrew. Within minutes, the compartment was filled with chatter. James telling stories, Sirius teasing him, Peter laughing too loudly, and Remus smiling quietly into his book. The walls he had built around himself began to soften. By the time the train slowed beside the Black Lake, they were already something more than strangers. Hogwarts outside. The night air was cool and smelled of pine. Lanterns glowed along the shore where enormous boats waited. First years, this way, called a warm, booming voice. Hagrid, though they did not yet know his name. The boys climbed into a boat together. The water rippled silver beneath the stars. And then, around a bend, Hogwarts came into view, its windows bright, its towers reaching high against the sky. No one spoke for a moment. Brilliant, James whispered. Sirius simply stared. Remus felt something inside him unclench, the feeling of arriving somewhere he might belong. Peter leaned forward, eyes wide, and forgot to be nervous. Inside the great hall, candles floated overhead, and the enchanted ceiling mirrored the starry sky outside. The Sorting Hat sang its song, and one by one the students were called forward. When Black, Sirius echoed through the hall. Whispers ran through the crowd. Everyone expected Slytherin. Sirius sat, the hat fell over his eyes, and a moment of silence stretched. Then it shouted, Gryffindor! The hall gasped. Then applause erupted from the red and gold table. Sirius exhaled, light flooding his face. Moments later, Potter James joined him there, the hat deciding almost instantly. Lupin, Remus, took a little longer, kindness and caution wrestling with courage, but the hat at last declared, Gryffindor, again. Even Pettigrew Peter followed, the hat wavering before placing him beside his new friends. That night, in the cozy Gryffindor Tower, the four boys found beds beside one another. The fire crackled, the curtains glowed red in its light, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and polish. James lay on his back, staring up at the canopy. "This," he murmured, "is going to be brilliant." "Better than brilliant," Sirius replied, already half asleep. Remus smiled in the dark, a quiet hope warming his chest. Peter whispered, "Best friends, all of us," though no one answered. They were already dreaming. Outside, the moon drifted peacefully over the castle. The stars turned slowly above. Within the tower, 4 boys slept side by side, unaware that they had just begun a story that would travel through generations. The castle watched over them kindly. The night was calm, and somewhere in that stillness, the first shimmer of friendship settled, like light across their dreams. The years that followed passed like a slow, steady turning of pages, dear listener. Each chapter filled with familiar comforts and small discoveries. In the mornings there were bright windows and hurried breakfasts. In the afternoons there were lessons that smelled of parchment and chalk dust, of warm stone and candle wax. And in the evenings there were fires in the common room, soft conversations, and the peaceful feeling of a castle settling into rest. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew grew into Hogwarts the way a tree grows into soil. Quietly at first, and then so naturally that it was difficult to imagine them anywhere else. They became known, not only because they laughed loudly and moved through the corridors with a certain bold confidence, but because they carried something rare between them, the gentle certainty of belonging. James was still bright and energetic, often the first to suggest an adventure, the first to raise his hand in class when he felt sure of an answer, and the first to grin when a professor gave a reluctant nod of approval. Sirius, with his sharp humor, could turn even a dull moment into something light. Remus became the steady heart of their group, quietly observant, often reading, often thinking, always noticing what others missed. And Peter stayed close, eager and grateful, laughing a little too quickly at jokes, and smiling the moment anyone looked his way. They learned Hogwarts together. They learned the rhythm of moving staircases and which ones liked to change their mind. They learned which portraits would offer helpful hints, and which would demand a compliment first. They learned the comforting sounds of the castle at night. Distant footsteps, soft wind at high windows, and sometimes the faint rattle of armor shifting as if stretching. They grew, and they changed, and their friendship deepened, not with grand speeches, but with 1,000 small moments. Shared sweets on the train after holidays, whispered jokes during long lectures, quiet loyalty in the face of awkward days, and the steady, reassuring presence of one another when the world felt a little too large. And yet, beneath the easy surface of their boyhood, there was one truth that Remus carried, like a carefully folded piece of paper tucked inside his chest. A secret. Once a month, Remus disappeared. His friends noticed it at first, the way you notice a missing book on a shelf. Something slightly wrong, not alarming yet, but impossible to ignore for long. Remus would look tired. Sometimes his hands would shake faintly when he lifted his goblet. His eyes would carry a quiet heaviness, as if he were walking through a cold rain only he could feel. He never complained. He never asked for pity. He simply tried to keep his life tidy and ordinary. But James and Sirius were not the sort of people who let a friend go quiet without reaching toward them. It began with questions that sounded casual, like they were asking about homework. "You okay?" James said once, as if it were nothing. As if the answer didn't matter much, except his eyes made it clear it mattered very deeply. Remus smiled in that careful way he sometimes did. Just tired. Sirius watched him for a moment, then looked away as if he was studying the fire. But his mind was already turning, gently, steadily. Sirius noticed patterns the way some people notice music. He could feel when something repeated, and slowly, over time, the truth became impossible to avoid. It was Sirius who spoke first, one quiet evening in their second year, when their dormitory was dim with wand light, and the castle wind whispered softly against the windows. "It's the moon," Sirius said very calmly. Remus froze, book half open in his hands. James sat up, instantly alert, his face losing its easy grin. Peter looked between them, blinking, uncertain. Remus's voice was soft when he answered, and there was no anger in it, only tired acceptance, like someone who has carried something alone for too long. "Yes." For a moment, the room was very quiet. Not the frightening kind of quiet, just the thoughtful kind, the kind where words are choosing how to land gently. Remus braced himself the way he always did. He expected fear, distance, that subtle, painful shift where people decided he was now something different. But James did not move away. James scooted closer, as if closing a gap Remus hadn't realized was there. "So you've been dealing with that alone?" Remus swallowed. You didn't want us to worry," Sirius said, and his voice was unusually steady. "Or you didn't think we'd stay." Remus didn't answer, because the truth was too close to the surface. Sirius leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and said very simply, "We're staying." Peter nodded quickly, as if frightened of being left out of the decision. "Yes, of course we are." Remus stared at them, as if his mind had to relearn the shape of the world. James reached out and placed a hand on Remus's shoulder, warm, firm, utterly certain. "You're our friend," he said. "That's the beginning and the end of it." Remus's eyes went bright, and he looked away quickly, pretending he needed to adjust his book. Sirius added, almost lightly, as if making a plan for a weekend adventure, "We'll figure out how to make it easier." "How?" Remus whispered, before he could stop himself. James's smile returned, but softer now. Gentler. "We'll learn. We'll do something. We'll be there." Remus should have argued. He should have told them. It was too dangerous, too complicated, too unfair. He should have said that some burdens were meant to be carried alone. But the truth was he wanted, quietly, desperately, to believe them. And they did not just say it, they proved it. They began with research. It started, as many Hogwarts plans did, with sneaking into the library when they shouldn't have, whispering and laughing under their breath as Madame Pince glared in their direction. Remus, the most experienced at reading quietly and looking innocent, acted as the calm center. James and Sirius tried to pretend they were just curious. Peter carried stacks of books, eager to help, eager to be useful. They learned quickly that some knowledge didn't sit on the open shelves. It lived in the restricted section behind a chain and a lock, knowledge that required permission and good reason. They did not have permission, but they did have determination. And so, over time, they learned how to borrow what they needed without being noticed. They read about transformations, about the old, difficult magic that allowed a wizard to become an animal. They read warnings written in tight, serious handwriting. "Do not attempt. Dangerous. Requires patience. May go wrong. Celeste. James's eyes always lit up at dangerous, though Remus kept reminding him that dangerous did not mean fun. Sirius read with a sharp focus that surprised even Remus. In those hours, Sirius's usual restless energy became something steadier, as if he had finally found a problem worth all of his attention. Peter tried hard. He truly did. He struggled with some of the heavier spells, but his persistence mattered. He copied notes. He checked ingredients. He reminded them of dates and steps they might otherwise forget. And little by little, the impossible began to become possible. The process was not quick. It was not dramatic in the way stories sometimes pretend. It was slow, careful work, months turning into years. There were evenings where nothing seemed to progress at all, where they sat tired and frustrated, the common room fire crackling, their notes spread across their knees. There were moments of small success, a charm holding steady for longer than expected, a pattern of wand movement finally making sense, a complicated explanation clicking into place in Remus's mind like a lock turning. And there were setbacks. Quiet, manageable setbacks. Nothing terrifying, nothing that needs to be held too tightly in your mind tonight. Just the ordinary truth that difficult magic demands time. Through it all, one thing remained constant. They kept showing up for Remus. They kept studying. They kept trying. They kept believing that he deserved to have someone beside him, even when things were hard. By the time they reached their 5th year, they were no longer boys guessing at magic. They were young wizards with real skill in their hands, steady confidence in their minds, and a bond that had grown strong in the way only shared effort can make it. And then, finally, it happened. James succeeded first. One quiet night, tucked away from curious eyes, James completed the final set of movements and focused his mind. For a moment, nothing changed, just a teenage boy with messy hair and a determined face. And then his shape shifted. Not frightening. Not wrong. Just different. A stag stood where James had been, tall and proud, with steady legs and bright, alert eyes. His antlers were elegant and strong, not aggressive, simply sure of themselves. He turned his head and looked at his friends as if to say, "Well, what do you think?" Sirius let out a laugh that sounded like pure delight. Remus's mouth fell open, and he quickly covered it with his hand, eyes shining. Peter gasped, then laughed nervously. That's brilliant." James, as a stag, gave a little shake as if preening. A few weeks later, Sirius did it too. Sirius's transformation came with that same fierce focus he had developed over the years. He finished the spell, and his form shifted into a large black dog, shaggy, strong, with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold the same sharp humor Sirius always carried. The dog circled once, then sat neatly, tilting his head as if amused by their expressions. Remus laughed softly, the sound full of relief. James, back in human form now, clapped Sirius on the back. "You looked like you could scare half of Slytherin just by walking past." Peter tried to smile, but his hands twisted together. "And me?" he asked quietly, hopeful and nervous all at once. Peter's transformation was the hardest. Not because Peter was hopeless, he wasn't, but because fear clung to him more tightly than it clung to the others. The magic required inner steadiness, and Peter's mind often darted toward what could go wrong. Still, he tried, again and again, and his friends didn't mock him for struggling. Sirius teased him, yes, but in a way that still made room for Peter to feel included. James encouraged him loudly. Remus helped him patiently, one careful step at a time. And then, one evening, Peter managed it. A small rat appeared, quick, clever, whiskers twitching, eyes bright, not grand, not majestic, but useful in its own quiet way. Peter's rat form scurried across the floor, squeezed into a tiny gap between a trunk and the wall, then popped back out again as if showing off. James whooped, Sirius laughed, and Remus looked like someone who had been holding his breath for years and had finally been told he could exhale. They gave themselves nicknames, not as a serious ceremony, but as a playful, warm tradition that made their secret feel like something they shared, rather than something Remus carried alone. Remus became Asterisk's Moony, because the moon was part of his life whether he liked it or not, and the name felt gentler than the truth. Peter became Asterisk Wormtail, partly because it made him laugh to have a gross nickname, and partly because it made him feel like he truly belonged in the group. Sirius became Asperton Padfoot, because his big dog paws made soft sounds on stone floors, and because the name sounded like something that could trot happily through the castle without being questioned. James became Asterisk Prongs, because his stag form wore antlers like a crown, and James, Sirius, and Peter, now Animagi, began to do what they had always dreamed of. They began to go with Remus on the difficult nights, not in a way that needs to be described too strongly, not in a way that feels heavy. Just this: Remus was not alone anymore. On the nights when the moon rose full and the world became hard, his friends were beside him in forms that could safely stay near him. Their presence made the nights calmer, less frightening, more bearable. In the quiet aftermath of one of those nights, Remus sat on the edge of his bed, hands clasped tightly, and his voice shook as he spoke. "You didn't have to do this." James shrugged as if it was obvious. "Yes, we did." Sirius leaned against the bedpost, arms folded, expression stubbornly casual. "You're ours." "That's it," Peter nodded rapidly. Whoa. "We're a team." Remus blinked quickly, eyes shining. "Thank you," he whispered, and it sounded like a word that carried years inside it. That was the truth of them. They weren't perfect. They were loud. They were reckless sometimes. They made mistakes. They teased too sharply. They pushed rules too far. But at the center of their friendship was something steady and real. They did not abandon each other. As their 5th year settled in, Hogwarts became even more familiar. They knew the castle's personality now, its quirks, its secret corners, the way it seemed to shift slightly when you weren't paying attention. They knew where the floors creaked, and which suits of armor were most likely to clank if you brushed past too close. And because they had become who they were, curious, daring, and a little too clever, they began exploring with even greater confidence. They found hidden passages behind tapestries. They noticed that certain stone blocks were smoother than others, as if touched more often. They learned that some shortcuts existed only if you took 3 steps backward first, then tapped the wall in just the right place. They began collecting these discoveries like treasures. One evening in late autumn, rain tapped softly at the windows, and the common room fire glowed low and cozy. Upstairs in their dormitory, the 4 friends lay sprawled across beds and floorboards, parchment and books scattered around them in comfortable chaos. Sirius stared at the ceiling and spoke in a thoughtful voice, like he was turning an idea gently in his mind. "We've learned this castle better than anyone," he said. Remus looked up from a book. "That's probably true." James grinned. "You saying we should get an award?" Peter chuckled, then quieted when Sirius continued. "What I mean is, we found so many ways through the castle. Passages, shortcuts, and it's all in our heads. What happens when we leave?" James's grin softened. "We remember it." Remus's eyes narrowed slightly, thoughtful. "Memory isn't perfect." Sirius sat up, his grey eyes bright with an idea that felt like sunlight. "Exactly." Remus's voice was calm, but you could hear the interest. "What are you thinking?" Sirius's smile widened. James leaned forward. "Like what?" Sirius said it simply, as if the answer was obvious. "A map." Peter blinked. "A map?" "A magical one," Sirius added. And now the excitement was spreading through the room. Not just ink on parchment, something alive, something that shows everything. Remus's fingers tightened on his book. That's complicated. James's eyes sparkled. Complicated is our favorite. Sirius began pacing in the small space between beds, talking faster now, like a boy who could already see the thing in his mind. A map that shows the castle. The passages, the shortcuts, and... He pointed a finger like he was drawing in the air. The people. Peter's eyes widened. People. Remus inhaled slowly. Tracking magic. James nodded enthusiastically. We could do it. Remus looked between them. He should have told them no. He should have said it was too much, too risky, too advanced. But he could already feel his own mind joining the plan, the way it always did when something clever and challenging appeared. If we do this, Remus said carefully, we'd need to connect it to the castle's magic. Hogwarts isn't just a building. It has systems. Sirius snapped his fingers. Yes, exactly. We anchor it to Hogwarts, James added, and it has to hide itself. Peter nodded quickly. Blank parchment until you activate it. Sirius's grin turned delighted. And we give it a password. Something dramatic. James laughed. Something that sounds like we're about to cause trouble. They looked at each other, all four of them, and in that moment the plan felt less like an idea and more like a promise. They began at once, not in a grand way, just quietly, the way real projects begin. One book, one note. One whispered conversation in the library. They divided the work according to their strengths. James focused on the map's transforming nature, how it could appear blank and then bloom into detailed ink. He practiced charm work on scraps of parchment, making lines appear and fade smoothly, making shapes hold steady without constant attention. Sirius took on the tracking and detection work. He wrote home, carefully, cleverly, requesting old defensive texts from the Black family library. Books arrived at Hogwarts with serious titles and heavy covers, and Sirius read them with a kind of sharp satisfaction, as if turning old family magic towards something playful and bright was its own quiet rebellion. Remus handled the deepest part, the connection to Hogwarts itself. He read about the founders, about the way the castle's magic responded to intent, to need, to patterns established over centuries. He approached it like a gentle conversation rather than a conquest. Peter became the keeper of details. He copied notes, tracked steps, remembered which version of a spell had worked better, and in his small rat form he explored spaces the others couldn't reach. Tiny gaps, narrow routes, forgotten channels inside the old stone. He would return to the dormitory and announce proudly, "Found another passage," and James would cheer as if Peter had brought home a trophy. They worked slowly through winter and into spring, their project becoming a quiet heartbeat beneath their school days. It made them feel connected not only to each other but to Hogwarts itself, as if they were learning the castle's language and answering it back. When they felt ready, they chose a place to do the most important work. The room of requirement appeared for them one evening when they needed privacy, space, and the right tools. It opened like a kind secret, and inside it waited a long table, steady light, shelves of supplies, and a calm hush that felt like the room was saying, "Yes, you can do your work here." I saw. They chose parchment carefully, sturdy, old enough to feel alive in the hands but clean enough to accept new magic. They set it down in the center of the table like an offering. And then, one by one, they began to weave their spells. James laid the foundation, his wand moving with steady precision. The parchment shimmered faintly as if waking up. Sirius added the tracking enchantments with careful focus, speaking the words clearly, letting the magic settle into the fibers. Remus did the quietest part. His voice was barely above a whisper, his wand movements small and controlled. He wasn't forcing Hogwarts to obey. He was inviting the castle to share, to allow the map to reflect what Hogwarts already knew. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the parchment warmed gently beneath their hands, and a soft glow spread across it, like sunrise. James let out a breath. Sirius's eyes widened. Peter's smile trembled with joy. "It worked," James whispered. Peter laughed softly, like he couldn't help it. It worked. Now it was time for the details. They fed the map the knowledge they had gathered over years. Passages, shortcuts, corridors, staircases, doors that did not always behave. Ink began to flow across the parchment in fine, elegant lines, sketching the shape of Hogwarts with beautiful accuracy. It didn't look rushed. It looked certain. Like the parchment had always wanted to become this. They worked through the night, tired but happy, taking turns checking each other's spells, sipping water, eating a few stolen biscuits, laughing quietly when James's hair fell into his eyes again and again. As dawn began to brighten the sky beyond the room's windows, they stood together, looking at what they had made. Sirius swallowed. "We need the words." James grinned. "The password." Remus's eyes softened. "Something that fits us." Peter's voice was small but eager. "Something that tells it we mean mischief." And together, like a small ceremony only they understood, they spoke. Asterisk. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." The parchment came alive. Hogwarts appeared in full detail, corridors and rooms, towers and passages, and then, like tiny stars scattered across the map, little moving dots appeared. Each dot had a name. They watched in breathless wonder as they saw Professor McGonagall moving through the castle, as they saw students shifting in dormitories, as they saw the quiet motion of life happening all around them. James pointed, laughing softly. "Look, there's Filch." Sirius leaned closer. "And Mrs. Norris." Peter stared, wide-eyed. "That's everyone." Remus's voice was warm with awe. "It's beautiful." Sirius pointed to 4 dots in the room of requirement. "Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, Prongs, Astras, that's us," Sirius said quietly, and for once his humor softened into something tender. James's grin turned gentle. "We did it." Peter bounced on his heels, delighted. "We really did it." Remus blinked quickly, and if his eyes shone, he didn't apologize for it. They needed the concealment phrase, too, the words that would fold the magic away and let the parchment rest. James, smiling, said, "Something that sounds like, 'We're putting everything back where it belongs.'" Sirius nodded. "Something neat." Remus's lips curved. Something satisfied. Peter offered, "Mischief managed?" They all paused. And then James laughed. "Perfect." Together they spoke. Asterisk mischief managed. 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 The map went blank again, innocent as snow. And for a moment they simply stood there, 4 friends in the early morning light, holding proof of what they could do together. Not just clever magic, but teamwork, love disguised as mischief, loyalty disguised as laughter. When they finally returned to Gryffindor Tower, the castle waking around them, they were exhausted in the best way, like people who had built something that mattered. They tumbled into their beds, whispering a few last jokes, the map tucked safely away. And in the weeks that followed, they began to use it. Not constantly, not recklessly, though they certainly enjoyed it. They tested passages they had only guessed at before. They took routes that let them glide through the castle smoothly, unseen by prefects and teachers. They snuck to the kitchens for midnight bread still warm from the oven, and the house elves fussed over them with cheerful kindness, pressing treats into their hands like affectionate grandparents. The map became a companion, a secret, a delightful, glowing thing that made Hogwarts feel even more like home. And with it, their mischief became organized. They learned to look at the parchment and say, "Filch is near the trophy room," and then calmly take another corridor. They learned to glance at the dots and time their steps so perfectly that it almost looked like luck. They laughed a lot in those days. They felt young. They felt safe. And because your story is meant to be calming, dear listener, we'll hold the truth gently here. They did sometimes go too far, because teenagers are not always wise. And when a mistake was made, when a line was nearly crossed, James was the one who pulled things back toward safety, and Remus was the one who reminded them all to be careful with power. They learned, slowly. The map was not only a tool for jokes, it became something softer, too. It became a way for James to notice Lily Evans, not just as a girl he wanted to impress, but as a person worth truly seeing. James began spotting her dot moving through the castle in steady patterns, stopping to help younger students, spending extra time with responsibilities, choosing kindness even when it wasn't easy. And because James was capable of growth, because he had been taught kindness at home, he began, little by little, to change. Sirius teased him about it, of course. Peter carried messages now and then with dramatic seriousness, as if delivering a royal decree. Remus watched quietly, pleased, because he had always known James had goodness inside him. He only needed time to let it lead. In those same months, the war beyond Hogwarts began to feel less like distant rumor and more like something real. Students spoke in hushed voices about families choosing sides, about fear spreading beyond the school gates. Even so, Hogwarts remained for them a steady place, stone and firelight and friendship holding firm. And in the heart of it all, the Marauders' map lay folded in a pocket, warm with magic, waiting. It had been created for mischief, yes, but it had been born from love, from four friends refusing to let one of them suffer alone, from four minds joining together, each contributing what they could. From the simple truth that the best magic is not always the loudest. It is often the kind that says, quietly, "I'm here. You're not alone." And so, dear listener, we end this section in the gentle glow of that truth. Four friends, still young, still learning, carrying a secret parchment that held not only Hogwarts' corridors, but their laughter, their loyalty, and the bright warmth of who they were together. Rest now. Let the image settle softly in your mind. A warm dormitory, a quiet castle night, and a folded piece of parchment, waiting like a friendly promise. The story will continue into years that test them, shape them, and reveal what their magic will become. But for now, in this calm moment, everything is steady, everything is safe, and the map sleeps, tucked close, held by friendship. The later school years arrived quietly at first, dear listener, as if Hogwarts itself tried to hold on to peace for as long as it could. There were still warm fires and familiar lessons. There were still meals in the Great Hall where laughter rose like steam from hot food, and evenings where the windows shone gold against the dark. But outside the castle, the world was changing. Whispers in the Daily Prophet grew more frequent. Worries became harder to ignore. Conversations in corners turned softer, more careful. Some students went home for holidays and returned a little paler, a little more serious, as if they had heard grown-up truths they could not quite explain. Even so, inside Hogwarts, James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter still found moments of light. They continued to use the map, sometimes for mischief, sometimes simply because it made them feel clever, safe, and connected. They planned midnight trips to the kitchens for warm rolls and sweet treacle tart. They timed their steps so perfectly that they seemed to drift through the castle without anyone noticing. And on good nights, when the sky outside was clear and the air inside felt calm, they would unfold the parchment and watch the little dots move through Hogwarts like fireflies. It became a comfort, that gentle movement, a reminder that life went on. A reminder that the castle was still full of people living ordinary days, studying, laughing, wandering to bed, stopping to talk in corridors. And for Remus most of all, the map was a quiet kind of reassurance. It was proof that his friends had not only stayed, but had built something with him, something that held the warmth of their bond in its very ink. As they grew older, their friendship grew more layered too, still playful, still bright, but with more understanding beneath it. James began to carry himself differently, especially once he started truly seeing Lily Evans as someone he wanted to be worthy of, not simply someone he wanted to impress. He changed in small ways first. He listened more. He showed off less. He started choosing kindness even when it wasn't the easiest path. Lily noticed, because Lily always noticed. She didn't forgive instantly. She didn't melt into romance like a storybook heroine. She watched James with a careful, thoughtful eye, as if deciding whether the boy who once chased attention had become someone steadier. And, as weeks became months, she began to smile at him more often. She began to speak to him with less sharpness. And, one evening, in the warm glow of the Gryffindor common room, with the fire crackling softly and the castle quiet around them, James walked over to Lily with a gentler bravery than he'd ever shown in any duel or Quidditch match. He sat down beside her. He talked, really talked. And Lily, after a long moment, let him. Sirius teased him mercilessly afterward, of course, grinning like a proud older brother. Remus watched with quiet satisfaction, because he had always believed James had goodness inside him, and it was a relief to see it winning. Peter was enthusiastic too, eager to be part of the excitement, eager to carry small messages and do small, helpful things that made him feel included. And so, in the midst of a changing world, love began to grow as well, patient and real, rooted not in drama, but in choice. The map witnessed it all, not because it understood romances. Parchment doesn't dream in that way, but because it tracked the way two dots began to spend time close together, the way they lingered in the library, or walked the grounds, or sat in the common room when everyone else drifted away. Quietly, the map held the shape of those days. And when graduation came in the spring of 1978, Hogwarts did what it always does. It let its students go. There were clear skies above the lake and proud towers behind them. There were robes, photographs, and the strange feeling of stepping away from a place that had been home. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew left Hogwarts together. Older, more capable, still bonded by years of shared history, shared secrets, shared laughter. And yet, beyond the gates, the world was no longer a place where the biggest worry was detention. The war that had been a shadow at the edge of school life had become unmistakably real. They joined the Order of the Phoenix quickly, almost as if it was the only answer that made sense. They had spent years pushing against cruelty, protecting one another, choosing loyalty. Now loyalty had a larger shape. They were young, so young, really, but they had skill, courage, and a fierce belief in protecting what was good. The map came with them, folded carefully and kept safe. At first, James tried to use it out of habit, like a comforting routine. Then he remembered what the map was truly connected to: Hogwarts. The parchment's magic sang strongest within the castle's walls. Outside, it remained itself, but it couldn't light up the world beyond the school the way it once had, so it became something different. Not a tool for strategy. A keepsake. A memory you could hold. A reminder of the years where the world had still felt bright. James and Lily married in a small ceremony filled with warmth rather than spectacle. There was laughter. There were quiet tears. Sirius stood with James, looking impossibly proud and a little overwhelmed. Remus smiled softly, his eyes reflecting both joy and a wistful tenderness. Peter beamed and clapped loudly, eager, thrilled to be part of something that felt important. Afterward, in a small home that they tried to keep peaceful, James sometimes framed the map behind protective glass, like a strange piece of art no one else could see. Visitors would glance at it and see only blank parchment. But James, on quiet nights, would take it down and hold it with careful hands. He would not always activate it. Sometimes he would simply look at it, letting the memory of Hogwarts wrap around him like a familiar cloak. Sirius threw himself into the order with a kind of restless intensity. He volunteered for the hardest jobs, not because he loved danger, but because he couldn't stand the thought of sitting still while others suffered. He lived simply, moving from place to place, never quite settling, as if home was something he had to rebuild from scratch. Remus's path was more difficult. The prejudice against werewolves did not disappear just because a war was happening. If anything, fear made people narrower, doors closed more quickly, jobs became harder to keep. Some days, Remus felt like he lived half in the world and half outside it. Dumbledore asked him to do difficult work among communities who did not always trust the ministry, work that required patience and careful listening. Remus did it because he had always had a quiet courage in him, the kind that didn't need applause. But there were lonely stretches too, weeks when he had to manage his transformations alone, without the comfort of friends beside him in animal forms. On those nights, he sometimes thought of the map, not for its utility, but for its reminder. Once, I was not alone. Peter remained with the Order as well, doing errands, carrying messages, serving as lookout. It was honest work, and useful. But Peter's heart was complicated. He had always wanted to matter. He had always wanted to be safe. And war makes those wants louder, sharper, harder to ignore. He was not built for direct confrontation, not like James and Sirius. He didn't have Remus's steady endurance either. Peter's strength had always been quieter, watching, listening, slipping through unnoticed spaces. In peaceful times, that could be harmless. In frightening times, it could turn into something else. Still, to the others, he was Peter, part of the group, part of their history. They tried to keep him close, tried to make sure he felt included, because they believed friendship could hold. And for a while, it did. Then, in July of 1980, Harry James Potter was born, a small baby with messy black hair and bright green eyes. A child who made Lily laugh through exhaustion and made James look at the world as if everything in it suddenly mattered 10 times more. Sirius visited often, holding Harry with surprising gentleness, making silly faces until the baby gurgled and kicked his feet. "He's going to be trouble," Sirius announced proudly. "He is going to be loved," Lily corrected, though her smile softened the firmness of her words. Remus visited more carefully. He worried about being a risk, even when no one asked him to worry. But when he did hold Harry, his expression was tender, almost amazed, as if he couldn't quite believe something so innocent could exist in a world so rough. Peter came too, bringing small gifts, smiling eagerly, praising the baby's clever little hands, as if Harry had already performed advanced charms. And the map, quiet, folded, waiting, remained tucked away like a future that might still happen. James sometimes imagined Harry at Hogwarts one day. He imagined his son running through corridors, laughing, learning, making friends. He imagined for a moment giving him the map when the time was right. It was a warm thought, a hopeful one. But war does not always let hope stay simple. A prophecy was spoken. A rumor became a target. Fear sharpened into urgency. James and Lily were forced into hiding. There are ways to tell that part of the story with harshness, dear listener, but tonight we will hold it gently, because this is a sleep story, and your heart deserves softness. What matters is this: they wanted to protect their child. They chose a powerful spell, one that would hide their home so completely that only one person could reveal it. That person would carry the secret like a precious jewel. At first, everyone assumed Sirius would be the secret keeper. He was James's brother in all but blood. He was Harry's godfather. He was fierce, devoted, unshakably loyal. But Sirius, thinking quickly, worried that he was too obvious a target, suggested a different plan. "Voldemort will come for me first," he said, tense with concern. "He'll expect it. It's too simple." James frowned. "Then who?" Sirius hesitated, then said, "Peter." Peter blinked rapidly. "Me? No one would suspect you," Sirius insisted. "That's the point." "It's safer." Peter protested at first, voice shaking, saying he wasn't brave enough, that he wasn't strong enough. But eventually he agreed, and the others, wanting to believe, needing to believe, accepted it. The spell was cast. The secret was placed into Peter Grew's keeping. And then, quietly, terribly, Peter made the choice that broke everything. It's easy to call it one thing: cowardice, betrayal, fear. But real people are rarely made of only one piece. Peter was frightened. He wanted safety. He wanted to live. He wanted to matter. And when faced with pressure and promises and threats, he chose himself. He revealed the secret. On October the 31st, 1981, Voldemort found James and Lily. This part of the story is heavy, but we will touch it with care, like setting down something fragile. James died trying to protect his family. Lily died protecting her son. And Harry, because of love deeper than magic, because of sacrifice older than spells, survived. When the morning came, people arrived to the ruin of what had been a home. They found the baby alive. They found heartbreak. They found confusion. They gathered evidence. And among the shattered pieces was something strange: a frame broken, glass cracked, and a sheet of blank parchment. The map. It was confiscated, logged, and eventually it drifted through the Ministry's hands and back to Hogwarts, where confiscated magical objects often ended up. It found its way into Argus Filch's office, folded and forgotten, looking like nothing at all. Blank, quiet, sleeping. Meanwhile, the living pieces of the story scattered. Sirius, learning of James and Lily's deaths, was shattered with grief and rage. He hunted for Peter, desperate to understand, desperate to stop him. Peter, clever in the way frightened people sometimes become, created a scene that made it look as though Sirius was guilty. There was chaos and noise and confusion, and Peter vanished, leaving behind only a small sign of himself, a detail meant to prove he was dead. Sirius was arrested and sent to Azkaban without a proper chance to defend himself. Remus, hearing that James was dead and Sirius was accused, felt the world go quiet in the most painful way. His friends were gone, one dead, one imprisoned, one dead, one scattered. He was alone again. And Peter lived. Hidden. Small. Safe. He took the shape of a rat and slipped into the background of wizarding life, where no one thinks to look closely. Years passed. Harry grew up away from the wizarding world, unaware of the map and the love woven into it. And at Hogwarts, the Marauders map sat in a drawer, silent and patient, until, one spring afternoon in 1990, two red-haired boys found it. Fred and George Weasley were in trouble. Nothing truly serious, just the sort of trouble that always seemed to find them as naturally as breathing. Filch assigned them detention, ordered them to file confiscated objects, and warned them not to touch anything. Which, of course, made touching everything feel almost like destiny. They rummaged through drawers with the cheerful curiosity of natural pranksters. They found odd objects, silly cursed trinkets, things that squeaked and buzzed and made George laugh into his sleeve. And then Fred pulled out an old piece of parchment. "It's blank," George observed. But it didn't feel blank. It felt warm, like it was waiting to be recognized. They tried simple, revealing charms. Nothing. They tried more creative approaches. Still nothing. Finally, George tapped it and said, half annoyed, half curious, "Show yourself." Ink bloomed across the parchment. Not a map yet, but words. Not gentle words. Cheeky words. Mocking words. Words that sounded like boys who had once laughed loudly and thought rules were a sort of game. Fred's face split into a grin. "Oh, this is beautiful." They experimented until they discovered the proper phrase, spoken softly, sincerely, like joining a secret club. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." The map revealed itself. Hogwarts appeared in perfect detail, and tiny dots moved across it, each labeled with names. Fred and George stared, then looked at each other with that identical spark that meant, "We have found treasure." They swapped it with an ordinary blank parchment so Filch wouldn't notice. And from that day on, the map lived in Weasley hands. Two boys who understood it instinctively, not as a weapon, but as a wonderful tool for mischief that stayed mostly kind. For 3 years they used it carefully. They learned passages, they learned patterns. They learned how to move through the castle like it belonged to them. And then, in 1993, they made a choice that mattered more than they knew. They gave it to Harry Potter. Harry, burdened by fear and rumor and the weight of being famous for something he never asked for, sat one evening in the Gryffindor common room looking tired and far away. The twins approached him with unusual softness in their expressions. "Early Christmas present," Fred said, placing the parchment down. Harry looked confused. "It's blank." George smiled. "Not if you know how to talk to it." They taught him the words. Harry spoke them, and Hogwarts unfolded beneath his hands. The map was his, though he didn't yet understand why. And as Harry used it, sneaking into Hogsmeade and avoiding trouble, and simply marveling at how alive his school could look, the map began to do what it always did: reveal truths. One night, Harry saw a name that shouldn't have been there. A dot labeled *Peter Pettigrew, *Peter Pettigrew, moving close to his friend Ron Weasley, moving with the strange, twitchy path of a rat. Harry stared, heart thumping in confusion, because Peter Pettigrew was supposed to be dead. That single detail, one name on one parchment, became a doorway. Doorway back into the past. Back into betrayal. Back into the truth. And the truth, once found, changed everything. It led to the revelation that Sirius Black was innocent. It led to Peter being exposed. It led to the world shifting once again, not toward darkness this time, but toward clarity. And when Remus Lupin, now a professor, held the map again. His hands trembled. He activated it alone in his office, and when the familiar lines appeared, when he saw the castle he once loved and the magic he once built with friends, tears gathered in his eyes. Not because the map was sad, but because it still existed, because something they made together had survived, because even after everything, after war, after loss, there was proof that their love had once been real and that it had left something behind that could still help. The map, always patient, continued. It continued to guide. It continued to reveal. It continued to carry the gentle echo of 4 boys who had once sat in a dormitory with rain tapping at the windows and a fire glowing below, dreaming up something impossible and then making it real. And that, dear listener, is where we will rest for now, with the image of a folded parchment in a pocket, with the soft glow of ink that can awaken, with the reassurance that even when life changes, the best parts of what we make, the love, the loyalty, the care, can remain. Close your eyes. Let your breathing slow again. Hogwarts is quiet. The castle is safe. The map is resting. And the story still has one gentle section left, where the world heals, time moves forward, and the legacy of the map settles into peace. After that year, dear listener, time continued the way it always does, patiently, quietly, one day following another like soft footsteps along a familiar corridor. Hogwarts carried on. Students still hurried to lessons with robes flapping and books clutched to their chests. Howls still swooped through the rafters of the great hall. Snow still gathered on the grounds in winter, and sunlight still warmed the stone in spring. The castle remained what it had always been, steady, ancient, and quietly alive. And the Marauders' map, once made for mischief and midnight laughter, found itself becoming something more. In Harry Potter's hands, it was still a tool for sneaking and adventure, yes. It still helped him avoid trouble when he needed to. It still offered the thrill of knowing what others did not know. But as Harry grew older, as his life filled with choices that were heavier than school rules, the map became a guide in a different way. It became proof that someone had cared for him before he could remember. Proof that his father had been young once, bright, clever, full of life, and proof that friendship, when it is true, leaves marks that time cannot easily erase. There were nights when Harry unfolded the map not because he needed it, but because he missed something he could not name. He would sit by a quiet window, wand light soft, and watch the dots drift through Hogwarts. He would trace corridors with his finger the way you might trace the outline of a memory. He would imagine footsteps and voices, laughter in stairwells, whispers behind tapestries. And sometimes, without even realizing it, he would smile. The map followed him through danger too, but we won't hold those dangers too tightly tonight. We will simply say this. Harry lived through years that asked him to be brave again and again. He faced things no child should have to face, and the map, steady, silent, clever, helped him when it could. It warned him when trouble was near. It helped him move unseen when being seen would have brought harm. It supported him in small ways, practical ways, comforting ways, and even when Harry felt very alone, the map reminded him, once 4 boys had refused to let one friend be alone. That reminder mattered. When Remus Lupin returned the map to Harry after the truth was revealed, after Sirius's innocence came to light and Peter's lies were exposed, there was a quiet weight in the gesture. Remus didn't explain everything then.
He couldn't. Not in the middle of fear and chaos.
Not while emotions were still sharp and complicated. But the map had done something important. It had brought the past forward. It had returned buried truths to the light. And in doing so, it had begun to heal something that had been broken for far too long. The years rolled forward. Harry continued at Hogwarts, growing into himself, learning what it meant to carry responsibility without losing kindness. He learned that bravery wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was simply choosing the right thing when the easy thing was right there, tempting and convenient. And then, at last, the Second Wizarding War reached its end. It ended not in triumph for triumph's sake, not in power claiming power, but in something gentler at its core. Love, sacrifice, and the choice to protect others, even when the cost was high. When the battle was over, and the dawn arrived pale and quiet over Hogwarts, the castle stood scarred but still standing, like a tired guardian who had held the line. In those hours after the noise had faded, Harry sat in the ruined warmth of what had once been familiar corridors. He was exhausted in every sense of the word. Grief lay heavy in him, but so did relief. And when he reached into his pocket and pulled out the Marauders' map, it felt like holding both the past and the present at once. The parchment was smudged at the edges, creased from use, but it was intact. It had survived. Harry unfolded it carefully, hands gentle, as if touching something living. He spoke the words quietly. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." And Hogwarts appeared again, its corridors drawn in ink as faithful as memory. The map showed movement, people tending the wounded, searching for friends, gathering together in the slow, careful beginning of healing. Harry traced a corridor with his finger, and his throat tightened. So many names were missing now. So many dots that had once moved across the parchment were gone. The map didn't explain. It didn't comfort with words. It simply showed the truth of what remained. And Harry, breathing slowly, whispered something into the quiet air. Not to the map exactly, but to the hands that had made it, to the laughter preserved inside it. "Thank you." He thought of James Potter, who had died too young. He thought of Sirius Black, who had lost so much, and yet still chosen love. He thought of Remus Lupin, who had carried pain from childhood and still became gentle. He even thought, briefly, carefully, of Peter, because that name too was written into the map's history, though the choices behind it had been wrong. The map held them all, not judging, not forgiving, just remembering. And sometimes, remembering is its own kind of tenderness. After the war, as the wizarding world began to rebuild, Harry kept the map safe. He didn't show it to everyone. He didn't wave it around like a trophy. It wasn't that kind of object. It was too personal, too full of history, too full of love that had once been young and bright. He stored it carefully at home, bringing it out now and then the way you bring out an old photograph. Sometimes he activated it just to see Hogwarts again, to reassure himself that the castle was still alive. Sometimes he left it blank and simply held it, feeling the texture of the parchment beneath his fingers, letting the memory of its warmth settle inside him like a quiet ember. Life moved forward, and Harry did too. He married Ginny Weasley, whose spirit was strong and warm and steady. Their home filled with the kind of ordinary chaos that is, in its own way, a blessing. Cups left on tables, laughter echoing down hallways, children running barefoot and breathless through the rooms. They named their first son James Sirius, and in that name Harry placed both love and memory, two people who had shaped him, two people who deserved to be carried forward gently into the future. Their second son was Albus Severus, a name that held complicated truths and hard-earned understanding, and their daughter was Lily Luna, bright as a morning, soft as a night sky. As the years passed, Harry found himself doing something he had never expected, becoming quietly content. Not because life was perfect, not because grief vanished, but because love returned. It always does, in one form or another, if you let it. And then came the day James Sirius Potter received his Hogwarts letter. The house was filled with excitement. Ginny smiled in that proud, slightly watery way she had when her heart felt too full. Harry watched his son, so eager, so bright-eyed, and felt the past brush softly against the present. That evening, after the excitement settled, Harry called James into his study. The room was quiet, lamplight warm, the world outside the window resting in night. "There's something I want to show you," Harry said. James leaned forward immediately, curiosity sparkling. "What is it?" Harry opened a drawer and lifted out a folded sheet of parchment. To James, it looked like nothing. Blank, ordinary, but Harry held it as if it were precious. "This is the Marauders' map," he said softly. James blinked. "A map? It's blank." "It's blank." Harry smiled. "It won't be, once you know how to speak to it." James looked up sharply. "Is it yours?" "It was given to me," Harry said. "But it was made by 4 students when they were at Hogwarts. One of them was your grandfather, James Potter." James's face changed in an instant, wonder and pride rising together. "Grandad made it?" Harry nodded. "With his best friends. They were brilliant, but they were also young. They made mistakes. They pushed rules too far sometimes." James shifted, impatient already, hungry for the magic. Harry held up a finger gently. "This map is powerful. It can show you every corridor in Hogwarts, every classroom, every secret passage. It can show you where people are, moving in real time." James's breath caught. "Can I have it?" Harry's smile softened. "Not yet." James made a sound of protest, and Harry recognized the stubbornness immediately. It was familiar. It was older than James himself. "You can have it," Harry said, calm and steady, "when you've learned what it means to hold power responsibly." James frowned. "I can be responsible." Harry nodded, not arguing, not dismissing. "I believe you can, but responsibility isn't something you say. It's something you do." James stared at the blank parchment, as if he could already see it glowing. Harry continued gently. "Your grandfather and his friends used the map for mischief. Some of that mischief was harmless. Some of it wasn't. I want you to use it wisely. I want you to understand the difference between a prank that makes people laugh and something that hurts." James swallowed, listening now, quieter. Harry rested his hand on the parchment. "This isn't just a tool. It's a piece of history. It's love preserved in magic. And if you carry it, you carry that love too." James nodded slowly. "Oh." Harry folded the map again and placed it back in the drawer, and the way James watched it, you could tell he was already imagining corridors, passages, adventures. But there was something else in his eyes too. Respect. The map waited, patient, as it always had been. Eventually, James did earn it. Not in a single grand moment, but through time, through choices, through growing, through learning that being clever meant nothing if you didn't also choose kindness. When Harry finally gave him the map, he did it with quiet ceremony, showing him the words. James spoke them, and Hogwarts unfolded beneath his hands. The boy's face lit up with wonder in a way that made Harry's throat tighten, because for a moment it felt like time folded in on itself, like James Potter the father was watching James Potter the grandson discover the magic he had once made as a teenager. And the map, steady, loyal, enduring, did what it always did. It revealed the castle. It revealed the people. It revealed the hidden paths. It revealed possibility. As Albus and Lily grew older, the map became something shared. The three siblings sometimes bent over it together, whispering and giggling late at night. They planned small adventures, nothing too wild, nothing too dangerous. They used it to avoid being late to class, to find one another after Quidditch practice, to sneak to the kitchens for warm bread and cocoa. And the map, still cheeky, still playful, still carrying the voice of long-gone boys, responded the way it always had. It still refused to show the room of requirement clearly. It still tracked Peeves, who remained as stubbornly present as ever. It still held those old names at the top, preserved like an inscription. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, Prongs. Those names remained, even as generations changed, because the map was not only about function, it was about memory, it was about friendship. As years turned into decades, stories about the map drifted through Hogwarts like a pleasant rumor. Not everyone knew it existed. The Potter children kept it mostly secret, sharing it only with trusted friends. But whispers still formed, a magical map that showed everything, created by Harry Potter's father, impossible to replicate. Some professors suspected. Some smiled knowingly when students appeared from odd corridors at suspicious times. Professor McGonagall, older now but still sharp-eyed, almost certainly knew. And perhaps she allowed it. Perhaps she understood that Hogwarts had always been shaped not only by rules, but by the way students pushed against them, learned from them, grew through them. Perhaps she remembered that James Potter had been irritating, yes, too bold, too loud, but also brave, loyal, and ultimately good. Perhaps she remembered Sirius Black's fierce love and Remus Lupin's quiet compassion. And perhaps she knew that the map, in the right hands, was not a danger. It was a legacy. In time, the parchment itself began to show age at the edges. Tiny creases, slight yellowing, the software of something loved and used again and again. But the magic did not fade. It stayed steady, like a candle that never goes out, because it had been built carefully. Because it had been built together. Because it had been built with something deeper than clever spells. It had been built with loyalty. And loyalty, when it is true, holds. The map continued its quiet work, guiding students, supporting small adventures, helping people find their way through corridors, both literal and emotional. And the greatest truth of the map, dear listener, was never only that it could show secret passages. The greatest truth was what it represented. 4 boys who had loved each other enough to do the impossible. 4 friends who had combined their talents and their hearts into something that outlived them. 4 names at the top of a parchment, reminding anyone who saw them. Friendship matters. And now, as this tale settles to its close, let us rest with a gentle image. Imagine Hogwarts at night. The castle is quiet, wrapped in soft darkness. The windows glow dimly, the grounds are still. Somewhere inside, a student sits at a wooden table with a candle burning low, and before them lies a folded piece of parchment. They whisper the words, soft, respectful, excited. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. Ink blooms. Corridors unfold. Tiny dots move. The castle lives. And in that simple moment, the student is not only holding a map, they are holding a story, a history, a love letter to friendship. A reminder that the best parts of us can survive if we pour them into something made with care. Now, dear listener, let your breathing deepen. Let your mind grow quiet. The castle is safe. The map is resting. The laughter of 4 friends lingers, like warm light in the corners of memory. And you can rest too, held gently by the knowledge that love woven into magic lasts. Mischief managed. The map whispers into blankness once more, and the world, soft and calm, continues on. In the years that followed, dear listener, the Marauders map became something quietly unusual at Hogwarts. Not a rumor shouted across tables, not a prize displayed for attention, not a weapon to gain power. It became instead a private companion, a folded piece of warmth that lived in pockets and drawers, wrapped in the careful trust of those who understood what it truly was, because the map had never been only ink and enchantment. It had always been a piece of friendship, pressed flat and preserved. And when James Sirius Potter carried it through Hogwarts, he carried more than a clever trick. He carried a family story. He carried a promise made long before he was born. You don't leave your people alone. At first, of course, he was still a student, and students are wonderfully human. He was excited. He was curious. He wanted to see every corridor, every hidden stair, every passage that made Hogwarts feel like it had a secret smile. He wanted adventure. But the map, oddly, taught him gentleness too. It did this not by speaking kindly. It wasn't built for kindness in its words, but by offering a constant reminder: the castle is full of lives, full of people. Every dot was a person with their own day, their own worries, their own tired feet and hopeful plans. When you hold that truth in your hands, it becomes harder to be careless. So James learned, slowly and for real, that mischief could be light without being sharp, that fun could be harmless, that the best kind of rule-breaking was the kind that ended with laughter for everyone, not embarrassment for someone who didn't deserve it. He learned this partly because his father taught him, yes, but also because James wasn't alone. He had Albus and Lily beside him, and the three of them made their own small set of rules. No pranks on first years, no humiliating anyone, no jokes that could turn into fear. And if a plan felt mean in the stomach, you didn't do it. They still had fun, of course. Hogwarts is practically built for fun, the way it hides surprises in plain sight. They used the map to slip down to the kitchens for warm bread when the wind rattled the windows and the castle felt extra chilly. They used it to time their steps, so they arrived at the common room just before curfew, cheeks pink from running, Whisper laughing as they shoved the portrait open. They used it to find empty corridors for practicing spells without anyone bumping into them, and to locate friends who were always getting lost. Sometimes, late at night, James would unfold the map, not because he wanted to sneak anywhere at all, but because he wanted to see Hogwarts breathing. There's something very calming about watching a castle at rest, dots drifting slowly toward dormitories, a professor pacing thoughtfully in an office, someone stopping at a window for a moment, as if looking at the stars. And every now and then, Peeves zipping across the ink like an exclamation point. The map was a reminder that life continues, even on difficult days. Even when you're anxious, even when you're homesick, even when you feel like you don't quite fit the shape of the moment. It was a kind of quiet reassurance that Hogwarts was always full of people doing their best. One winter evening, James was on his way back from the library with Albus, when the map did something that made him pause. They weren't even using it. It was folded in James's pocket, dormant and blank. But as James reached into his robe for something, his quill, perhaps, or a chocolate frog he'd forgotten, his fingers brushed the parchment, and he felt it, a warmth. Not magical heat, exactly. More like recognition. He didn't understand it at first. But later that night, when he unfolded the map in the dormitory and spoke the familiar words, he noticed something subtle. One corridor near the hospital wing glowed faintly brighter than usual, as if that part of the castle had been touched more recently. Albus leaned in, curious. "Whoa, sir," James frowned, not sure. They watched the dots. They watched a cluster of students moving near the hospital wing. Small dots, restless, pacing. Then they saw Professor's dot arrive and pause there for a long time. Then, slowly, one dot moved away from the wing, drifting back toward the stairs, calmer now. James stared, and something in him softened. He folded the map again carefully. "What?" Albus asked, gentle. James shrugged, but his voice came out quieter than usual. Nothing, just people having a hard day. Albus nodded as if he understood. And that was the thing. The map, in its own strange way, trained them to notice, to be aware, to see the castle not as a playground to conquer, but as a home shared by hundreds of lives. The map made you feel clever, yes, but it also made you feel connected. That winter, Lily used it for something that had nothing to do with sneaking. A friend of hers, one of those students who always looked brave, always smiled, always insisted they were fine, began missing meals, not skipping on purpose, not for drama, just fading. Lily didn't gossip. She didn't march up and demand answers. Instead, one evening, she unfolded the map near the fire, while James and Albus pretended not to watch. "I'm not being nosy," she murmured. Just checking." She looked for her friend's daughter. She found it tucked away for a long time in a quiet corner of the library, not reading, just sitting. Then she watched it drift slowly toward a window on a high corridor, where the dot stayed still for a long time. Lily's face pinched with concern. James, seeing it, felt that same soft pressure in his chest, the one that meant, do something kind. So Lily did. Not publicly, not dramatically. She simply happened to walk that corridor the next day with a spare scarf in her bag and a warm pastry from the kitchens. She sat beside her friend without asking questions right away. She offered the pastry first. She said quietly, "I was thinking about you." And her friend, after a long moment, exhaled, the way people do when they've been holding too much inside. The map didn't do that. But the map helped them notice where kindness was needed, and the kindness did the rest. As James Sirius grew older, he began to understand the map's history more deeply, not the shiny parts, the real parts. He began to see that the Marauders had been brilliant and loyal, but also flawed and reckless, sometimes cruel in ways they didn't fully understand at the time. He began to understand that love doesn't require perfection. Sometimes love is messy and young and loud. Sometimes love learns late. But when love is true, it still matters. One evening, James sat with his father during the holidays, the map safe at home in a drawer, and asked a question that had been quietly forming for a long time. "Dad," he said, "do you ever miss them, the people who made it?" Harry looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I miss what I never got," Harry said softly. "I miss my father. I miss what my life could have been." James swallowed. "But the map helps, doesn't it?" Harry's smile was small. "It does. Sometimes it feels like holding a hand you never got to hold." James looked down, thinking. Then he asked, "Do you think the map knows?" Harry breathed out gently, like a laugh that didn't quite become a laugh. "It doesn't know like a person," Harry said, "but it remembers. It holds, it continues." James nodded slowly, as if that was enough. And it was enough, because the map's greatest gift was exactly that, It continued. When James returned to Hogwarts, the map returned too, folded and ready, like a familiar friend waiting patiently. And the older James became, the more he began to use it, like his father had once used it in his later years at school. Not as a way to break rules for the thrill of it, but as a way to protect. Small protections, nothing dramatic. A quiet warning when a corridor was crowded and someone anxious might feel overwhelmed. A gentle detour when a friend needed space. A careful glance before slipping into an empty classroom to practice spells without interruption. And sometimes, on nights when the castle felt particularly quiet, James would sit with the map open and simply watch. Not searching for secrets, just watching the living shape of Hogwarts. It was soothing. It reminded him that the world kept moving, steadily and calmly, even when your thoughts felt tangled, even when you were worried about exams, even when you missed home, even when you felt uncertain about who you were becoming. Dots moved. The castle breathed. The map held it all. And through it, the old names remained, steady as stars. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, Prongs. They were not just names anymore. They were a lesson, a reminder, a quiet, enduring vow. Some things last. And when James finally folded the map away each night, he did it carefully, as if tucking in a sleeping creature. Mischief managed, he'd whisper, and the parchment would go blank, resting, content to wait until it was needed again. Section 6. Where the map belongs. Longer, gentle closing. There comes a point, dear listener, when even the most beloved objects begin to ask a quiet question. Not aloud, not in words, but in feeling. The question is simple. What happens next? The Marauders map had traveled through many hands, created by 4 boys in a dormitory filled with laughter and daring, confiscated, forgotten, rediscovered, used by twins who understood mischief like a second language, passed to Harry Potter, who used it not only for sneaking, but for survival, for courage, for finding truth. Then carried into a calmer world where it became something gentler again. A family legacy. But every legacy eventually reaches a fork in the road, because some treasures are meant to stay hidden. And some are meant to be protected in a way that does not rely on one family's careful hands forever. James Sirius Potter began thinking about this during his final years at Hogwarts. He didn't talk about it right away. He kept the thought tucked away, like the map itself, folded and private. But it would surface sometimes. Late at night, when the dormitory was quiet and the castle wind sighed softly at the windows, he would unfold the map, watch the dots move, and feel something tender and strange. A sense that the map wasn't only his, it belonged to Hogwarts. It was part of the castle's story now. It had become a thread stitched into the fabric of the place. He mentioned it first to Albus, because Albus always understood thoughtful questions. They were sitting by the fire in the common room, long after most students had drifted off to bed. The room was calm, full of soft orange light. Outside, snow fell quietly against the dark. James took the folded map from his pocket and turned it over in his hands. Albus looked up from his book. "You're thinking again." James huffed a small laugh. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Albus smiled faintly. "Only when you do it with that face." James glanced down at the parchment. "Do you ever wonder where it should end up?" Albus's eyes softened, serious now. "You mean after us?" James nodded. They let the fire crackle for a moment, letting the question settle like a soft blanket rather than a weight. Albus said quietly, "It's not just a map, it's a historical artifact." James made a face. "That sounds like something a professor would say." Albus shrugged. It's still true. It... James's voice dropped even lower. But if we just hand it over, doesn't that kill the magic of it? Albus leaned forward slightly. Not necessarily. It might protect it, keep it from being lost, or stolen, or used cruelly. James frowned. It was made for mischief. It was made for friendship, Albus corrected gently. Mischief was just how they expressed it. James stared at the top of the folded parchment, as if he could see the names through it. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, Prongs. Albus continued softly. I think the real question is, how do we keep the map's spirit without risking it ending up in the wrong hands? James exhaled slowly. Yeah, that was the truth of it. Because Hogwarts would always have students with clever minds and mischievous hearts. Some would use the map to sneak to the kitchens. Some might use it to help a friend. But someone, someday, might use it in a way that hurt, not out of grand evil, but out of carelessness, out of cruelty, out of that sharp teenage desire to feel powerful. James didn't want that. Not for the map. Not for what it represented. So, during the summer before his final year, James spoke to his father. They sat together in the quiet of home, where the world felt safe and ordinary. A kettle whistled softly. Somewhere in the house, Lily was laughing at something Ginny said. The sound was warm, grounding. James took a breath. Dad, can we talk about the map? Harry looked up, expression gentle. Of course. James hesitated, then said, I've been thinking a lot. Harry nodded, letting him take his time. James continued, It's ours, yes. But it's also Hogwarts's, and it's bigger than us. It's history, your dad, your friends, everything. Harry's eyes flickered, tenderness and old grief, always present beneath the surface, like an ocean beneath calm water. James rushed on, earnest. I don't want to lose it. And, I don't want it used badly. I keep thinking, maybe it should be protected somewhere, properly. Harry didn't answer right away. He sat very still, hands resting on the table, as if feeling the weight of time inside that question. Then he said softly, I wondered about that too. James's shoulders loosened with relief. Harry looked at him with quiet pride. The fact that you're asking this means you've understood the most important part. James swallowed. So, what do we do? Harry leaned back slightly, thoughtful. There's an archive at Hogwarts, he said. Old enchantments, historical objects, things that need protection. It wouldn't be displayed. It would be stored safely. James's eyes widened. But then no one uses it. Harry's smile was gentle. Unless it's allowed. Carefully. Under supervision. Or maybe it becomes a thing that Headmistress McGonagall, or whoever comes after, decides when it's appropriate to lend out. Like a library book, but much stricter. James laughed quietly. That sounds impossible. Harry's eyes warmed. Hogwarts is full of impossible things. James stared at the table for a moment, then said in a small voice, It feels like saying goodbye. Harry nodded, understanding that too. It can feel like that. But sometimes protecting something isn't losing it. Sometimes it's loving it properly. James's throat tightened. You don't want to keep it. Harry's gaze dropped briefly, then lifted again, steady. I've kept it for a long time. Long enough to know what it meant to me. Long enough to pass it on to you. Long enough to let it be part of our family. He paused, then said softly, but it was born at Hogwarts. It belongs to the castle's story. And it might be safer there, watched over by the place that helped create it. James nodded slowly, letting that settle. So they made a plan. Not rushed, not dramatic. A calm, careful plan. At the end of James's final year, after exams and feasts and farewells, he kept the map folded safely in his trunk until the last day. Then, when the corridors were quieter, when students were already boarding the train, and the castle had that strange, peaceful feeling of a year ending, James walked to the headmistress's office. He didn't sneak. He didn't try to be clever. He knocked. Inside, the office smelled faintly of ink and lemon drops. Portraits blinked sleepily. A fire crackled softly. Headmistress McGonagall, older now, but still sharp and watchful, looked up from her desk. Mr. Big Potter, she said briskly, if you're here to confess to anything, you may save us both time by writing it down. James smiled nervously.
No, Professor.
Headmistress, I'm not. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That alone is suspicious. James swallowed, then pulled the folded parchment from his robe. McGonagall's gaze fixed on it instantly. Something old and knowing flickered in her expression. You've brought trouble into my office, she said, tone dry. James shook his head quickly. Not trouble. Ah. Not exactly. McGonagall gestured with her quill. Speak, Mr. Potter. Do. Faith. James took a breath. It's the Marauders' map. The portraits in the room seemed to lean in, suddenly interested. McGonagall's mouth tightened in the faintest, most controlled expression of recognition. I suspected, she said, carefully neutral. James continued, voice steadier now. My dad gave it to me. And I'm graduating. I've been thinking about what happens to it next. McGonagall watched him, silent. James added, it belongs here, at Hogwarts. But it also needs protecting. I don't want it lost again, or used cruelly. So, I'd like to place it in the Hogwarts archive. Or wherever you think is right. McGonagall's eyes softened by half a degree, which for McGonagall was practically a hug. You're surrendering it, she said, as if testing the truth. James nodded. Not because I don't love it, because I do. But because I respect what it is. McGonagall sat back slightly, gazed distant for a moment, perhaps seeing 4 boys from decades ago, bold and bright and infuriating. Then she said quietly, your grandfather was a menace. James couldn't help it. He laughed. I've heard. McGonagall's lips twitched. He was also brave, loyal. And, though it pains me to admit it, brilliant. James's chest warmed. McGonagall reached out. Give it here. James placed the parchment in her hands. She held it with care that surprised him, fingers gentle on the old folds. It will be protected, she said, voice firm. It will be stored with wards, and it will not be used without strict oversight. James nodded, relieved. Thank you. McGonagall looked at him sharply. Do not thank me yet. I may still assign you detention out of habit. James grinned. McGonagall's gaze softened again, just slightly. You've done a good thing, Mr. Potter. James blinked. He hadn't expected that. Thanks. McGonagall cleared her throat as if uncomfortable with sincerity. Off you go. The train will not wait for philosophical discussions. James turned to leave, then hesitated. Headmistress? McGonagall raised an eyebrow. James said softly, if someone ever needs it for the right reason, I hope it can still help. McGonagall's expression became very still, very thoughtful. It is Hogwarts, she said finally. Hogwarts has a way of giving people what they need, when they truly need it. James nodded and left. And so, the map came home again, not to Filch's drawers this time. Not forgotten and lonely, but protected, respected, held in the castle's care like a sleeping piece of history. Over the years it became legend again, not as a rumor students chased wildly, but as a quiet story older students told younger ones in soft voices. A story about 4 boys. A story about friendship. A story about a map that could show you everything, if you were trusted with it. Sometimes, late at night in the archive where old enchantments rested, the map lay folded in darkness, silent, blank, patient. And in the castle above it, students continued to live their small lives, laughing, learning, worrying, hoping, exactly as students always have. The map didn't need to be open to matter. Its magic was already complete. It had already done what it was born to do: preserve a bond, carry a legacy, guide people through hidden paths, and perhaps, sometimes, when Hogwarts needed it, when a student was lost or frightened or trying to protect someone they loved, the castle would make a quiet decision. A locked cabinet would open for the right hands. A parchment would be placed on a desk with careful instructions, and somewhere a new voice would whisper, I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. Ink would bloom again. Corridors would unfold. Dots would move. And the map, faithful as ever, would do its gentle work. But tonight, dear listener, we do not need to follow it into new adventures. Tonight we rest. We rest with the idea that some things are loved best when they are protected. We rest with the picture of Hogwarts calm and steady beneath the stars. We rest knowing that friendship, when it is real, does not vanish. It becomes part of the world. It becomes a quiet warmth that lasts. So close your eyes. Let your breathing soften. The map is safe. The castle sleeps. The fire burns low. And somewhere, in the deep, old heart of Hogwarts, a folded piece of parchment rests like a peaceful promise. Mischief managed. In the quiet years that followed, dear listener, Hogwarts settled back into its familiar rhythm. Not a perfect rhythm, because nothing living is perfect, but a steady one. A rhythm made of ordinary days, of lessons and laughter, of rain tapping against high windows, of the smell of parchment and old books, of candle smoke drifting toward the enchanted ceiling, of the great lake glinting like glass on calm mornings. And deep within the castle, behind careful wards, the Marauders' map slept. It was stored safely now, protected in a way it had never been protected before, not hidden away in shame or locked up in irritation, but preserved like a treasured piece of history, a magical artifact, a legacy, a love letter written in ink. Most students didn't know exactly where it was kept. They only knew the story, if they knew it at all. A whisper passed down in Gryffindor common rooms in soft voices during late-night conversations. A map that showed everything. a map that could find any path, a map made by boys who loved trouble and loved each other. And like all legends at Hogwarts, it grew around the edges, becoming a little larger, a little brighter, a little more impossible each year. But the map itself remained simple. Folded, quiet, blank, blank, waiting. Because the strangest thing about powerful magic, dear listener, is that it tends to listen. Not like a person listens, exactly, but like the castle listens. Like an old tree listens. Like a river listens. In a slow, patient way that responds to need rather than noise. And Hogwarts has always responded to need. That is part of what makes it feel alive. So it was no surprise, really, though it would feel like one in the moment, that there came a night when the map woke not for mischief, but for kindness. It happened during an ordinary winter term, years after James Sirius Potter had graduated. The castle was quiet, wrapped in snow and wind. Students were inside, safe from the cold, their cheeks warm from fires and chatter. The corridors, late at night, held that special softness that only Hogwarts has, when the torches glow low and the portraits doze and the staircases seem to settle as if even they are sleepy. In Ravenclaw Tower, a student sat alone with their homework spread out in front of them. Not a first year this time. Not a wide-eyed child who still believed every worry could be solved by a friend's hand on their shoulder. This student was older. 15, perhaps 16, at that age when your thoughts can feel very loud and very private, and you begin to wonder whether anyone else in the world has ever felt exactly what you feel. They weren't in trouble, not officially. There was no rule being broken, no obvious crisis, just something quiet and aching. A feeling of being lost. Not lost in a corridor, but lost in the inside places where no map can normally reach. The student's name doesn't matter tonight, dear listener. You can imagine any name you like. You can imagine them as anyone. What matters is that they felt alone, and in the way lonely people sometimes do. They wandered. They wrapped a cloak around their shoulders and slipped out of the common room after curfew. Not because they meant to cause trouble, but because they couldn't breathe properly in a room full of sleeping people while their mind spun in restless circles. They moved through corridors like a shadow, heart tight, hands cold, thoughts heavy. The castle did not scold them. The portraits did not shout. The torches only flickered gently, as if saying, "Go on then, walk, if walking helps." The student drifted down staircases and through halls they barely noticed, until they reached a place with wide windows that looked out over the grounds. Snow was falling in slow, patient flakes, like the world was trying to hush itself. They stood there, staring out at the night. Trying to calm their chest. Trying to convince themselves that the feeling would pass. But feelings don't pass just because you ask them to, do they? Sometimes they pass when someone sees you. Sometimes they pass when someone sits beside you, without forcing you to explain. And that night, dear listener, Hogwarts did what it has always done. It offered help in a strange, old, quietly magical way. In the headmistress's office, far above, the door was shut. The room was still. The portraits slept in their frames. A fire burned low, and in a protected cabinet, warded, locked, safe, the Marauders' map rested in darkness, blank, silent. But something stirred in the castle's magic. Not alarm, not danger. Need. A soft human need. The kind that makes Hogwarts shift a staircase to guide you where you're meant to go. The kind that makes a door appear when you truly require it. The kind that makes old magic do what it was always meant to do, protect. In the headmistress's office, a small chime sounded, quiet and polite, as if even the alert didn't want to be disruptive. The headmistress, this was not McGonagall now, but someone new, someone kind and careful, stirred awake in her chair. She blinked at the ticking instruments on her desk, then glanced towards the cabinet. Her brow furrowed. She rose, padded softly across the room, and placed her hand on the cabinet door. The wards hummed beneath her palm, and to her surprise, they loosened, just a fraction, like the castle itself had decided she was meant to look. She whispered the countercharm, and the cabinet opened. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, lay the folded parchment, the Marauders' map. The headmistress didn't touch it right away. She simply stared, thoughtful. She had seen it before, of course. She knew what it was. She respected it, but she hadn't expected it to be calling. Because that was what it felt like. Not a loud demand, a quiet tug. Like a book that wants to be opened at the right moment. Like a candle that wants to be lit. The headmistress lifted the map carefully and carried it to her desk, laying it on the polished wood. She didn't activate it, not yet. Instead, she listened. Not with ears, with intuition, with the kind of knowing Hogwarts teaches those who serve it long enough. Then she picked up her wand, tapped the parchment gently, and spoke, very softly, the words she had been taught, the words written into Hogwarts lore like a secret hymn. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. The parchment bloomed into life. Hogwarts appeared in ink, elegant and precise, lines flowing like water. Dots glided through corridors, each labeled with names. The headmistress leaned forward, eyes scanning, heart steady. She wasn't searching for pranks. She was searching for someone who shouldn't be where they were. Someone alone, someone wandering in the night. And there, near the wide windows overlooking the snow, was a single dot, still and small, holding its place like a pause in a song. The headmistress exhaled gently. Not angry, not disappointed, concerned. She watched for a moment, letting herself understand. This wasn't mischief. This was a student trying not to fall apart. She folded the map once, carefully, then activated it again, watching the dot remain still. Then she did something very Hogwarts, dear listener. She didn't send a stern prefect to drag the student back to bed. She didn't burst in with a lecture. She didn't turn a quiet moment into a punishment. Instead, she took a cloak from its peg, stepped out of her office, and began walking calmly through the castle. She moved with unhurried certainty, as if she had walked these halls 1,000 times, which she had. The portraits blinked sleepily as she passed. A suit of armor shifted with a gentle clink. The castle, sensing her purpose, seemed to smooth her path. Staircases aligned, corridors cleared, doors opened without fuss. By the time she reached the window corridor, snowlight was spilling pale and soft across the stone. And there was the student, exactly where the map had said. They turned sharply at her approach, face flushing with surprise and guilt. Headmistress, I'm sorry, they blurted, words stumbling. I couldn't sleep. I wasn't. The headmistress raised a hand gently. Shh, she said, quiet as falling snow. You're not in trouble. The student blinked, confused. You're not? Their voice trembled on the edge of disbelief. The headmistress stepped closer, not crowding, just present. "Not tonight," she said softly. "Not for this." The student's shoulders sagged, relief and exhaustion mixing into something close to tears. The headmistress glanced out at the snow for a moment, then back at the student. "It can feel very large," she said. "The castle, the world, your own thoughts." The student stared at her, stunned. And because the headmistress spoke like someone who had once been young, too, someone who remembered what it was like to feel swallowed by your own mind, the student's breathing slowed. Just a little. The headmistress didn't ask for explanations right away. She simply said, "Walk with me." They began moving down the corridor together, steps soft on stone. The student's hands were still clenched, but gradually they loosened. "Do you like hot chocolate?" the headmistress asked, as casually as if it were midday. The student hesitated. "Yes." "Good," the headmistress said. "Then we'll have some." They walked to the kitchens, where the house elves greeted the headmistress with delight and fussed over the student as if they were made of fragile glass. A mug was pressed into their hands, warm and sweet, steam curling up like comfort. They sat at a wooden table. A fire crackled. The student's shoulders lowered for the first time in hours. The headmistress waited until the student had taken a few sips, until their eyes looked a little less sharp with panic. Then she said gently, "Do you want to tell me what's been heavy?" The student stared into the chocolate. And then, slowly, they spoke. "No. Everything. Not all at once. But enough. Enough that someone else could hold the truth with them. Enough that the loneliness softened. Enough that the night became survivable. And in that quiet kitchen, dear listener, you can feel the true magic of the map. Not the tracking charm, not the clever ink, not the secret passageways. The true magic is what it made possible. A helping hand. A presence. A safe moment. A gentle reminder that no one is meant to carry everything alone. Later, when the student was back in bed, breathing steady, the headmistress returned to her office and unfolded the map once more. She looked at it, at the lines and dots, at the centuries of castle life captured in moving ink. Then she smiled faintly, not because she enjoyed being woken, but because she understood. The map had not woken for mischief. It had woken because Hogwarts still does what it has always done. It protects, it listens, it helps. And when the headmistress spoke, mischief managed. The map returned to blankness, like a sleeping creature content once more. The cabinet closed, the wards settled, and the castle returned to quiet snow, drifting beyond the windows, students dreaming in dormitories, life continuing softly. Rest now, dear listener. Let this section settle like a warm mug in your hands. Sometimes the greatest magic is simply being found when you feel lost. Sometimes that is the kindest kind of map there is. Section 8. The map as a promise, long, soothing, final continuation. As the years turned, dear listener, the story of the Marauders map became something deeper than legend. It became a promise, not an official promise written into school rules, not a promise carved into stone, but a promise woven into the feeling of Hogwarts itself. The castle remembers. The castle keeps. The castle cares. And the map, resting within it, became a quiet symbol of that care. It didn't need to be used often anymore. In a way, that was a good sign. It meant students were safe. It meant the world outside was calmer. It meant the castle didn't have to brace itself against war as often as it once had. Still, the map remained, because peace doesn't erase the need for guidance. It simply changes what guidance looks like. Sometimes guidance is a secret passage when you need to escape danger. Sometimes it's a warning before you walk into trouble. And sometimes guidance is simply the reminder that you belong somewhere, even on days you feel uncertain. The map carried that kind of guidance too. Because it was born from 4 boys who had once been uncertain themselves. James, so loved and confident, learning humility. Sirius, so rebellious and sharp, learning tenderness. Remus, so burdened and careful, learning he could be accepted fully. Peter, so desperate to matter, learning, too late, what it cost to choose fear over love. All of those truths lived inside the map, like layers of ink beneath the surface. Over time, Hogwarts staff treated the map with the respect it deserved. It wasn't displayed in a case like a museum item. It wasn't used as a novelty. It was kept like a sacred tool, only to be brought out when a situation truly called for it. And the more years passed, the more the map seemed settled, as if it approved. As if it had finally found the kind of resting place it had always needed. One spring, long after Harry Potter's children had grown and moved beyond Hogwarts, a young professor was appointed who had a special interest in magical theory. Not the flashy, showy kind, the patient kind. The kind that studies how spells endure, and why some enchantments fade, while others remain bright. This professor, gentle, curious, requested permission to examine the map, not to use it on students. Not to replicate it for power, but to understand it, to learn from it. The headmistress considered carefully. Then she agreed, under supervision, in the quiet of the archive. The professor unfolded the parchment on a table, hands steady, heart respectful. And when they spoke the activation phrase, softly, like a prayer, the map blossomed into life. The professor leaned close, eyes widening at the craftsmanship. They traced the lines without touching, as if afraid of disturbing the ancient magic. Remarkable, they whispered. Because it was remarkable. Even in a world full of enchantments, the map was a masterpiece. It wasn't just a locator charm. It wasn't just a moving drawing. It was multiple schools of magic woven together in harmony. Transfiguration like transformation, detection and identification, connection to the castle's living wards, concealment strong enough to fool even skilled adults. The professor studied the ink, the way it flowed, the way it held. And then, as scholars often do, they noticed something subtle, something that wasn't written in any book, something that made their chest feel warm. When they activated the map, a faint pattern appeared beneath the castle lines, almost invisible.
A hidden layer. Not names.
Not insults, not corridors. Something like a signature made of feeling. The professor blinked, leaned closer. And as they watched, the faint pattern shifted, just slightly, like a heartbeat. They looked up at the headmistress, startled. I didn't know it had... This, they murmured. The headmistress walked over, peered down, and her expression softened. It didn't always, she said quietly. The professor swallowed. What is it? The headmistress's gaze remained on the parchment. I think, she said, voice low and thoughtful, it is what happens when an enchantment is used with care for a very long time. The professor stared. You mean it's changed? The headmistress nodded faintly. Not in function, she said. But in tone. The professor looked back down, heart thumping softly. Down. A map shouldn't develop tone. A map shouldn't develop warmth. But magic is not always as simple as rules say it should be. Especially old magic. Especially Hogwarts magic. Especially magic born from friendship. The professor studied again, and they began to realize what the hidden pattern felt like. Not a spell, not a ward, not a message. A memory, a gentle echo, pressed into the parchment over decades, by every hand that unfolded it, every whisper of "I solemnly swear," every quiet mischief managed. The professor smiled, eyes shining. It's like they began, then stopped, unsure how to say something that sounded too emotional for scholarship. The headmistress finished for them, softly. It's like it's been loved. The professor nodded. Yes. That was it. It had been loved. Not in the way people love pets or paintings, but in the way people love stories that saved them. In the way people love a tool that helped them protect someone. In the way people love a connection to those they lost. The map had been carried through fear and grief and joy. It had been used to hide, used to find, used to rescue, used to laugh, used to notice. And all those uses had left a gentle imprint, like hands smoothing a page again and again until the paper remembers the shape of care. The professor documented their findings carefully, writing a paper that would be read by future scholars. But even as they wrote, they knew something. You could describe the enchantment. You could diagram the spells. You could list the layers. But you could never fully capture the most important ingredient, because the most important ingredient was not a charm. It was the reason the charm was cast. It was the friendship behind it. It was the choice to stay. That is why the map lasted. That is why it still mattered. That is why it still glowed. And so the professor, respectful of what they had touched, folded the map again, spoke the concealment phrase, and returned it to its resting place. The cabinet closed. The wards settled. And the map slept. Some nights in the archive, the headmistress would walk past the cabinet and feel that quiet warmth again. She would pause, not because she planned to open it, but because she felt something comforting in its presence. A reminder that Hogwarts holds more than lessons. It holds lives. It holds stories. It holds love. And that is where we'll rest now, dear listener. With the map safe, with the castle calm, with the snow melting into spring, and spring turning to summer, and the world continuing gently onward. Close your eyes. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow into a steady rhythm. Hogwarts is quiet. The map is sleeping. And all those footsteps, past and future, move softly through your imagination, like distant, peaceful rain. Mischief managed, and you, dear listener, can rest, held by the gentle truth that what is made with love can last a very long time.